Welcome, everybody. We thought we would just hold an informal video Q&A session for those of you that might be considering roots to regeneration. And Claire and I, over the last couple of years of running roots to regeneration and recruiting for each cohort, have come up with a whole bunch of different questions that we've been asked. So we've synthesized these together, and we're really just going to have the format today is running through a kind of a generic set of questions and answering in a really informal way so that you can get to know us a little bit. And also, hopefully, we can address any of your main concerns and questions. So, Claire, how about I start with the first two or three, which is kind of a little bit more about us, and then you could take the lead on some stuff relating to the program. We can get into a little bit of nitty gritty about the program itself, can't we?
Yeah, sounds
How
great.
does that sound?
Yeah, good.
Great. So the first question is just really about how did we come to want to do R2R in the first place? How did we come to regenerative agriculture? So how about you take the lead on that one?
Well, I think often this is like one of the most common questions I think we get asked. And for me, there was no one big thing. There wasn't this big epiphany, which for some people it is. But for me, it was like a layering up of different things that were happening, but mainly in it just getting harder and harder and harder to farm, and thinking to myself, like, it cannot be this difficult to grow food, our most fundamental need. Why is it so hard? And that was the point that I started looking for, like started being curious and looking for other options. And that's how I kind of landed upon regenerative agriculture.
Yeah, and for me, actually, similar. It was a layering process, but I guess my original background was kind of ecology and nature conservation. And then I met my ex-husband and married into farming, and then kind of fell in love with that world of farming. So for me, it was this coming from an environmental background and understanding quite deeply how ecosystems worked, and then seeing how farmers were trying to do it, and then realizing that, farming was on one side of the fence and, nature friendly stuff was on the other side of the fence. And sometimes the farmers would concede a little bit and let some nature stuff happen. And then occasionally the nature people would ask for the farmers to bring the cows on or something. Even in those days, actually, that was really early, before even conservation grazing was a thing. So I just never felt right. Like, well, how can that be that we've got this two, basically we're both working with land and nature, but seeing it through such different lenses. So yeah, I guess it was a layering process of understanding quite deeply both aspects. Sustainable farming, got really into trying to understand that, and then the kind of ecology background already, and then realizing in a bit of a aha moment that actually, if we've got a functional, healthy ecosystem, both should and could work better. But didn't really have a language for that at first, and that's when I kind of found out about the Savory Institute, and that was my kind of introduction to it from that point. And then we have developed our own language and way of describing that, and we'd call that whole system function now, wouldn't we? Is this kind of everything working together is how we would now describe it. So I guess that was my introduction to regenerative agriculture. Okay, the next question, and of course we could go on, couldn't we, about any one of these questions, but we'll try and keep it concise.
Caroline, you work with multiple different farms and estates now, and how does the difference across those different places inform how you teach regeneration?
Yeah, it's been quite a journey, actually. So when I first trained in holistic management and became a professional educator, or accredited professional as it's now known, I went out into the world thinking that I was going to try and slot into that role that is the advisor, the farm advisor, which is kind of from the old world of how you get help with farming, isn't it? You get somebody that's supposedly knows more about a subject than you to come in and tell you what to do, and then you go away again. And of course, soon realized that that didn't work and wasn't benefiting the farmer at all. And of course, with regenerative, particularly when you're working at that systems level, which is where we teach, isn't it? And we can get into that a little bit later, perhaps. Really what we're needing to happen is that farmer learns the principles of this, and then we can try and come up with something that works for their very unique context. And it became really apparent because I was working in the uplands, and I'm working from massive differences in scales, tiny farms right through to huge, biggest farms in the country. and every type of landscape, but a lot of them being upland landscapes, which are much more challenging than simply just doing some paddock grazing in a lowland field somewhere. So like really having to understand the principles very deeply and think about how to very uniquely come up with something very creative for that particular farming family or estate or whatever the context is. And again, I was working across scales of from an individual right the way through to a team of staff and people that own large tracts of land, including, you know, entire villages and things. So the context is massively, you know, changes. So that's been actually incredibly helpful to really drill down into the fact that what I teach is regenerative principles. And the process is different from an advisor that goes in and tells people what to do, but it's actually a kind of a training, coaching and co-creation process that ended up being more successful. So that's a longer term thing. It's much deeper. But ultimately, you then end up with farmers that are not dependent on an advisor. They've come up with something that truly fits their system, that is designed around what they want to achieve for their unique way of living and the future that they want to create, the landscape that's entirely unique to them, and the kind of profitability even that's going to be very unique, you know, whether they want to be as profitable as possible or whether they want to have a nice life and have enough to just survive and reinvest in the farm a little bit. They're two very different designs in terms of how we approach it with a farm. So that whole process of working with these people that have very, very different contexts has taught me what became the process that we use in roots to regeneration now. So, you know, it then became apparent that we talk about the 50-40-10, which is kind of, 50% is about mindset, because until they have that mindset shift, it's really hard for them to be able to adopt these systems. And then really 40% of it is about designing something that's completely unique for them. And then 10% is then what do we do? What are the practices that we choose to help that happen? So that's the kind of methodology that we've now adopted in R2R, but that's on the back of having it been refined across hundreds of thousands of acres in very different contexts. So Claire, tell us a little bit about your journey. Where did it start? Where did your regenerative journey start? Because I know you've been working across 2 different farms and you're now at Planton, so we'd love to know more about that whole story.
Yeah, so I guess I studied agriculture at university, but I went down the kind of food industry route and ended up worked for Red Tractor. I worked for the National Farmers Union in the food chain team. That led me to Sainsbury's in the agriculture team, working with farmer groups and also developing welfare standards. But it was at that point that I really kind of missed being practical. So bought some sheep and did the usual kind of new entrant route into farming. Arable land and where people had horses, and that's how I kind of started farming. So it's this like I guess combination of corporate and kind of hands-on, and I've done a few other things in between. But it was I'd always worked in animal welfare and sustainability, I guess. So within corporate businesses, it was that, and also at FAI Farms, I worked there as well after Sainsbury's, and it was definitely working on sustainability. And my view was always that if we can get the big guys to change, then although it's a big tanker to try and steer in a different direction, once it changes direction, then it's a powerful course. And so that was my kind of belief system. And then it was when I started learning more about how to do regenerative agriculture on the ground, like what do we change, and increasing my eco-literacy, I guess, and realizing that everything I'd learned at university and through my career was brilliant and great, but it was one way of viewing things, and the one thing it didn't do was view things through an ecological lens. So when I started learning more about how to farm in line with a nature's process, I realised that what I was currently doing, or what I'd been taught, was often fighting it. Weeds being a great example. Kill them, get rid of them. Even in an organic system, they must be eradicated because they are bad. To, they're an indicator of compaction. So if I manage the land differently, we won't have the compaction, and I don't have all the time, energy, and recreational diesel burning to get rid of them. And so it was that kind of sort of like revelation process was like, oh, right, okay, realizing that there was another way of knowing and another way of seeing things, and bit by bit kind of like questioning, then kind of unlearning and relearning what I kind of learned through my career.
And you started at FAI Farms, didn't you? And that's where we met, wasn't it? And we started developing what I've just described, really, didn't we? We developed the context, we developed the grazing plans, you went through that process of training, being coached, and then implementation. And that was your first kind of iteration of your first transition, wasn't it? And then more lastly, tell us a little bit about Planton.
Yeah, it was, excuse me. Exactly that. So yeah, when I say about my learning about regenerative agriculture, of course, that was meeting you and being trained, because we had the project to ask the question, our 4-year project of, does adaptive multi-paddock grazing work in the UK, which now loads of people are doing, people are talking about it, but back then when we first proposed that project, nobody or very few were doing it in the UK. It was new. And so it was learning about that stuff, and the more I learned, the more I wanted to do and the further I wanted to take it, and hence why we're here at Planton Farm, where our kind of mission is to discover the art of what's possible when it comes to perennial agriculture and livestock production and agroecology, and that's what we're kind of here to really look at, is particularly with our background in livestock. And so yeah, what's given me here is to take everything I learned doing one transition to then say, okay, if we do that again on another farm, what does that look like, and designing it from the beginning. So starting from the beginning. So in some ways it was harder because we had no livestock, we had no buildings, we had nothing, and it's that like, oh, I dreamt of having a blank sheet of paper to work from, but in reality was like, crikey, this is so many different things we could do. Whereas sometimes when you inherit, when you've already got at FAI, we already had chickens, we already had cattle, we already had sheep. So it was like, how do we change and evolve these? Get more cattle, less chickens, more chickens, all those different questions we could ask. So here it's been great, like a blessing and a curse, to design it from scratch, to be able to have all the bars off. But it was a bit more, bigger decisions to have to make in the process.
And of course, the great thing is with Roots Regeneration, we can accommodate either people that are doing it from scratch, or we can adapt to the existing, can't we? And we can do it over whatever timescale with whatever budget. It's all very much adaptable. But the whole point is we teach those principles, don't we, and guide people through that process so they can sit back and think about, okay, well, if I did start from scratch again, even if I do have livestock, what would I do differently? And then you can start to change that, that tanker, as you said, process. Okay. So, next question. Why did you design R2R as a 2-year program rather than a shorter intensive course? Well, that's a good question, which of course, we get a lot, don't we? Because people want the 10 quick steps to regen, don't they? Talk to us a little bit about your perspective, and then I can weigh in with mine.
Yeah, so I guess, or, even much shorter, oh, but I could go to this event or that, or there's a short course here. And I think that's even where R2R, Roots to Regeneration, came from in the first place, was our observation and ourselves attending lots of really great events, Groundswell, Carbon Calling, etc., and everybody getting really excited, and then going home and trying to implement the changes and it not sticking. And so it was like, there's more that's needed. There's something missing here. It's not enough, and that's because what we cover in the program and what I've learned definitely with our own farm, it's about a system. It's changing the system, and that needs a new way of learning and a new way of bringing that about, and often in most cases communicating with those around, because a farm is very rarely one person, only one decision maker. There's family, there's advisors, there's other investors, whatever there might be, and that's really where Roots to Regeneration came from. And then we did it as a year. Let's do a year. A year feels very long, and we got to the end of the first year with the first cohort, and they said, please make it 2, because we need more. We haven't had enough time to do everything we need to do. So it's the uniqueness of having the support to do the learning and to be reflecting back and deepening that all the time. And then when people start to make changes, the program is still there to be supporting people through those changes.
And just to confirm that that's what we deserved. So we have that kind of YouTube phenomenon, don't we, where people get into the idea of regen, they learn about it. It seems like Gabe Brown's Dirt to Soil is the gateway drug to regenerative agriculture. Everyone's read that, and then they get super excited. Then they spend a lot of time on YouTube, typically, don't they? And like you say, they do the circuit of all the events and the day trading. All of that is really great and really necessary. But are left with more questions than answers. And then, it's how do I do it? And that seems to be very overwhelming for people, doesn't it? And so we felt like there was definitely a gap in the market where our skill set particularly fit, and our methodology seemed to be quite unique in that space. So that is where we position ourselves. We're very much not the quick fix, we're the long haul. But I think, we describe sometimes, don't we, that it's that slow fast. It's like, okay, it might seem slow, but because we're taking you through strategically the learning, what we think you need to know, but deep learning, the mindset shift, which is hugely important, and you don't necessarily get from that whole YouTube and watching other people, because really what you're doing is you're watching their practices and thinking, how can I apply that to here? And it might not be right for your own farm. And it could be from a whole different part of the world, often is. So, we said the mindset change, the design of the farm, and then the whole support network that's needed. Because often what I was finding is that people come on a training, they get really, excited, and they might even have a plan, and they go away, and then their neighbours are all looking over they're judging them. And when things get hard, which they do, they fall back to factory settings, don't they? So we felt like we needed to address every aspect of that. So we need the support networks, the people to be able to come back and say, I had this guy challenging me on this, what should I say? Or, so this reinforcing the culture and the mindset all the time. And then, the second year, very much about helping to implement the plans that they created and the kind of learnings that happened in the first year. So we're very proud of the fact it's a really deep and broad program that addresses a lot of the challenges that people are not having addressed in these other programs. But that's not to say that these other programs are great, or these other day events or watching YouTube. All has its place, doesn't it? And it can help reinforce that to some degree.
Yeah, it's all important as part of the layering. It's not the only thing. It's great for expanding people's thinking and knowledge and experience and meeting other like-minded people. But instead of absorbing everything that everyone else is doing and thinking, how do I apply that? It's going to those things with like, I know what I want for my farm. How do I learn from this and deepen that? And I think just to pick up on your point there about the support, my example is always when we got a letter from our landlord when I was managing the farm at FAI to say you are in breach of your tenancy because you are not managing the land in terms of good agricultural practice because you're letting the grass grow long. That would have been an easy moment to go, panic stations, like, crikey, the tenancy is at threat here, I can't do that. But because we were working with you and I was able to, what do we think? So actually we, I rang them, I wrote a letter back, I explained in more depth of what we were doing, and why actually for the first time in a long time we felt like we were doing more for their asset, more for the soil than we'd done in a long time. And luckily they got that and they bought into that, and that was really good. But that would have been a really easy panic stations moment. Let's just top everything and go back to how we were doing it before.
So we're definitely finding that people are finding that really valuable, aren't they? Having that community of not just us being there to help and advise, but having their other peers around, having different challenges and seeing how people are, going through those different challenges. That could be incredibly helpful, particularly for the professionals who might be thinking about doing regen as some sort of profession. They can see the challenges that farmers go through, and I think that is a really useful aspect of it. So the next question kind of leads on to that, which it says, you talk about systems thinking or whole systems rather than just practices. Can you give us concrete examples of what that looks like? I can start on that if you like.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I've got just a recent example actually. So we talk a lot about the levels of regenerative agriculture, don't we, and how we describe this. So regenerative agriculture has lots of lineages. So we've got holistic management, permaculture, agrarians, there's understanding ag. all of those different lineages have different ways of describing it, and different frameworks that they use, and that's all great. And we have our own framework called the rooted framework that we use. So that's the kind of lineages, and then there's different levels to which people start to learn and engage with the regenerative. And what we were just talking about, which is looking at other people on YouTube, or going to an event where we're looking at other people, and the practices. So, no-till or mob grazing or outwintering or whatever, bale grazing. These are all practices that may be really useful to your farm eventually, but also may not be. And if you go with a practice first level of training, and simply just get inspired by somebody and try to bring that in, it could actually do more harm than good. So we take a more whole systems approach, and we've already described, we look at mindset and design, and developing your own unique context, and we also teach you all of the deep technical knowledge that you need to start to build that properly. And only then should you really think about what practices are really appropriate for you. So that's a higher level, a kind of more systems level of regenerative agriculture. So that tends to be what we're talking about. But in practice, what that could look like, and you've got a few different examples, but one that came up recently was a farm who got inspired by dirt soil, and decided to start doing some mob grazing. And then they were inspired by outwintering and hardy native cattle, so they'd got some hardy natives, but then had just started mob grazing without any proper grazing plan, which is not uncommon, and they'd not done what we do to start, which was a kind of forage inventory of working out what the actual carrying capacity of the farm is, and then designing the grazing plan around that. And they'd also had very light droughty soil that was very patchy, so they'd planted down kind of lucerne everywhere, which giving a good crop, but was very nitrogen heavy, and not particularly, you didn't get much bottom in there because it has a very low nitrogen to carbon ratio. And then they'd ended up, because this traditional native cattle take longer to grow, rear before you can finish them, and they had a contract where they were selling them finished, which all seemed really sensible and good on the surface. They ended up with far too many animals for the actual platform, so they were not able to do a proper grazing plan. They were constantly coming back around on themselves too quickly. And then at the same time, because of the kind of nitrogen rich plants, where they couldn't keep a thatch on the surface, and they couldn't have good functional ecosystem processes, they were going into drought much more severely, and also it was burning up their topsoil. So you've got a situation where they had all the best intentions. They picked up some of those practices from other people. They got super inspired, but the combination of those things together actually ended up being degenerative and highly unprofitable. So if they hadn't stepped in and got some help, they could have declared that a complete disaster. Regen doesn't work, and lost a lot of money potentially in that process. So, for that system, really what we're going to be doing now is thinking about what do they actually want, looking at the platform, building up the right swards, the right interventions for soil health, getting the right number of animals, thinking about perhaps selling those animals at a different stage because they take so much longer to finish. So it's changing their business model, and then bringing in a whole bunch of different infrastructure to manage that farm differently, and then also planting a lot more trees, and then resowing with a diverse permanent pasture, because they don't do arables, so there's no reason to have a some sort of short-term lay that is potentially burning out their topsoil. So that's a whole system design, as opposed to just getting very excited about regen and trying to do the right thing, and then actually possibly doing more harm than good. And that model, on the face of it, looks like it could be more profitable, for sure, quite a bit more profitable, work for them better, and get regenerative outcomes that will be measured. So put in a robust, series of baseline measures to do there. So that's one kind of tangible example. We could come up with lots of different ones, but that happens to be in a recent one. Anything that you'd like to say around that whole system?
I think it brings up a couple of things. One is the good old herbal lay, which is linked to your example, but is often we can all get very excited about herbal leys, including our government getting very excited about herbal leys and giving great payments under SFI, etc., for herbal leys. And then what we've seen is great swathes of beautiful permanent pasture being ploughed up in favour of a herbal ley, with just thinking about that one practice about putting in a herbal ley, because that's what everyone's talking about for soil health. But when we're not thinking about the whole system, we're not thinking about the soil, we're not thinking about the animals, we're just thinking about the plant at that stage. So if you plant a 16 species really diverse herbal ley into a soil which is very biologically inactive, or a dead soil, that it doesn't magically bring it to life. It's the connection between the soil and all of that diversity of seeds that brings things. So if you just plant loads of seeds into dead soil, it doesn't magically work. And then, of course, we hear, oh, it didn't work, or the herbs didn't come, or we had to re-sow it, like really common things, when actually it's just because it was a not thinking about the whole system. Or you get examples where we planted a herbal ley, but the animals wouldn't eat it. They stood around eating the hedges instead. If they've never eaten it before, or it's not right for the type, or if you put intensive dairy cows onto a herbal ley, you might get a drop in the tank. All of these different things that often don't get considered. So I think it's important about thinking that's the point as well, is thinking in the whole, rather than just into one narrow action that we might take.
And that whole includes people, doesn't it? So that whole includes the mindset shift that people have to go through in order to make the daily decisions, because a farm, of course, isn't just a design, is it, where things automatically run. It's the daily decisions of like going into a paddock and deciding, is that too long, or I know that we have to immediately defer to the farmer to be able to make those decisions. So if you haven't had that mindset shift, you're not going to be able to make those good ongoing decisions and get that feedback. So that's a critical aspect of what we tackle, isn't it, is teaching that systems thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And so another aspect to that example of systems thinking is addressing the root cause, which is another kind of key factor in being a good regenerative farmer, isn't it? And we would say an example of us teaching that is we have that red flag process, don't we, that we teach. So typically in a farm, a lot of things go wrong and there's a lot of costs associated with what we call red flags, which are species or a plant or animals that are causing a problem in our system. So it could be anything from a tick to an internal parasite to a thistle or buttercup, whatever the problem is that's becoming dominant and becoming a problem in our farming system. And you alluded to it earlier, but really we reframe that with a systems thinking mindset, don't we, to say, what's it trying to tell us? If we've got this problem, then, and we're in charge of the farm and we're managing it, then presumably we've done something that's meant that that's happening. And thinking of those as an indicator. And then we have a kind of systems process to go through to look at the life cycle of that species. What conditions does it like and thrive in? How did we inadvertently create those conditions for it to thrive? And then if we want rid of it, how do we think of it as a whole system shift? So rather than just going in and killing that species and then it just keep coming back, or something else comes back in its place because it's doing a job in that system, then we're trying to manage out of that problem, aren't we? We're trying to prevent it happening through good design, and thinking about it, constantly asking why are we getting it? Why wouldn't that happen in nature? Internal parasites are a great example, aren't they? We continually just treat them, dose animals for worms. It seems to be normalized that that's what you do. It's good farming practice to make sure you keep on top of that. That's reinforced by the vets, obviously with careful consideration about how often and what you use. But we're never really asking the question of why are our livestock continually getting these internal parasite problems? And, is it because we haven't been selecting the genetics that are, really promoting resistance? Is it that we're not allowing a long enough rotation so that we're killing the life cycle, or we're breaking the life cycle of the parasites? Is it because we're lacking the anthelmintic properties in the diverse pastures and the browse that we would have had in a wild system? All of these, is it that we're lacking our dung beetles and we're lacking our birds, the things that would be predating upon the species? So we have to think in that whole system way about why we're getting that problem. And that in itself helps you create a plan for how to address the problem, but it also teaches systems thinking, doesn't it? Because that whole process of doing that repeatedly with different problems makes you think in a different way about how to address any problem. So you're broadening it out from just the farm to people being able to be systems thinkers in any part of their lives, which can be a little bit of a curse and a blessing. So that's an example of systems thinking. Okay. Why do we bring farmers and food system professionals together in the same cohort? Do you want to tackle this one?
Yeah, I think this came up when Caroline and I were working together on behalf of corporates who were saying, can you put together a regen ag training program for our farmers? This is where we first started to notice it. And so we would do that. We put it together for farmers. And then two things happened. One, that the professionals would read through it and say, oh, why have you included that? Why have you included that? No, that doesn't make sense. That's not how our farmers think. And it was kind of like, okay, well, maybe we should put it to them first. So that happened. And it was like, oh, there's not an understanding here within professionals. Why would they? Nobody's been talking about regen ag before that point. But that's not something that's being taught. And then the second aspect was the farmers would do the training and start to make changes and start to want to think differently and do things differently. And then the food companies that they were supplying, let's say, that their milk contract was with, or their beef contract, they would start saying, oh, we're going to try this now or that now. And then people within that professional organization were like, oh, whoa, we're not sure about that. We don't know about that. We don't understand it. And the same with both the ones that off takers, so the ones that are buying the produce from the farms, but also the support, so vets, agronomists, farm business advisors. So a farmer was saying, I want to do this now, and those people without that understanding of what a regenerative system looks like would say, oh no, don't, with their advice would be not to, because they didn't understand it. And it was a kind of like farmers really were like, we want to make changes, but nobody around us wants to support it. So it felt really important to start with this. Let's just make it available for professionals, and now it's evolved into being something that's curated specifically for professionals and farmers by having two routes that we have that people can take through the program.
And it really works it was quite profound, I think, isn't it? Because like you said, I've had the same experience where, you go back and it's either your landlord or your vet or your agronomist or whoever the advisor is that is butting up against it immediately. And that is the support network of a farm. And if that isn't there, then you really are it's going to be difficult for them to transition. But when we actually did start to bring the professionals together with the farmers, and we buddy the professional up with a farmer most of the time anyway, that whole process of them sort of learning through the lens of that farm, and more generally in group sessions where they're all listening to each other's experiences, it really is quite profound, isn't it, in terms of their aha moments. And they can see all the different 360 aspects of a regenerative transition. And back to the previous question, which was about whole systems, of course the farm is just one part of a nested system. And as you quite rightly pointed out, if a milk supplier is suddenly trying to talk to their buyers about, doing something regenerative, and they're still limited and valuing just quantity over quality, and their sort of pricing is all structured around volume and efficiency, then they're immediately going to be struggling with that, aren't they? So yeah, if we're trying to answer the question, how can we shift the whole of the food and farming system to regenerative agriculture, then we need to move beyond just farmers, as important as they are. We definitely need to be starting to think about the whole system. So that's been a really great evolution, and the professional route this year's cohort has evolved even more, and we've now got a whole series of speakers related to regenerative principles being applied to other sort of beyond farming industries as well. So everything from lifestyle to regenerative economics to regenerative business design. So we're introducing all of those different aspects as well, so that professionals that might not be an agronomist, we can have any professional involved and they'll still benefit from understanding those regenerative principles and how they could then apply it to their own industry and their own profession, and try and find their niche in the ecosystem that's going to be the future, hopefully, which is the regenerative, future of food and farming. So yeah, it's been a great process, hasn't it? Okay. The program costs £9,979. That's a significant investment. How how do you help participants see the return on that investment within their business? Well, you could start on that if you like, and I can weigh in.
Okay, so I think the key part is actually in the question, as it is an investment. Like we completely recognise that, but this is an investment. Like fertilizer is an investment. Like farm business advice is an investment. Like an accountant is an investment to help with business planning. So it is an investment in the future of a business, and that is how we see it. And when we look at this, the idea with this is hopefully it's a one-off investment that you learn, and then, as Caroline said earlier on, we're aiming to teach you to be able to design your own regenerative system and manage that ongoing. Yes, there might be times where you bring different people into support, but it's an enabling expense, and it enables you to have a more resilient business ongoing, rather than a consumptive expense. You might spend £30,000 a year on fertilizer to keep the grasslands going every year, but that will happen every year, and likely prices are going to go up and down. So although it feels, especially in farming, it feels like just shy of £10,000 investment for personal development, for business development, stuff like that, feels quite a lot. Actually, it's a small amount compared to all of the consumptive expenses that are happening on farm each year.
Totally agree. And yeah, if you think about some of the farms I work with that are spending multiple of £10,000s on fertilizer, all of the veterinary costs that are generally, in a farm business. Of course, we're not guaranteeing to get rid of all of the veterinary costs by any means, but we can significantly reduce that. Housing costs, that's another one, isn't it? I work with a lot of farms that are housing 6-7 months a year, massive cost. Again, not every design is going to be outwintering, but there's ways we can definitely significantly reduce that. And just addressing all of the health issues in that system through that red flag process. We can cut out, herbicide use and a lot of the fighting that you have to do in the farm system to try and keep on top of those things. We can design out of that system. So yeah, completely agree. It's a significant investment. And we also needn't, we shouldn't brush over the fact it's quite a big time investment as well. We want people to take time out and do this well. And that is a cost, isn't it, to the business, to some people at least. So it is a very big investment. But as you quite rightly pointed out, we teach it, don't we, as part of our economics piece of the training, that we have these enabling investments and these consumptive investments or expenses, and this is definitely one of the keystone enabling investments that you could make in a farm business, because hopefully you can then continually get rid of all of your enabling expenses, or most of them at least, and then hopefully this is a one-off investment. And of course, the becoming part of the R2R is not just a 1 or 2 year process. It's an ongoing network of supportive people that you will be connected with forever, hopefully, that will then be your buddies ongoing as you kind of develop and evolve your business. So it will grow and grow with you. Okay. What do you say to farmers who are worried they don't have enough time for a 2-year commitment? Yeah, that's another good question. I can start on that. Yeah, so it is, as I've just said, a significant time investment. And of course, and I think we get into the structure of the program a little bit in a minute. So we'll come to that. But, there is Zoom calls that you have to make. There's 3 immersives on farm that we insist have to be attended. But there is some flexibility. So there's some of the deep technical learning is online resources, and there's no kind of absolute have to get this done by such and such a date. We have guidelines on when that can be done, but there's some flexibility in that. And also we design each person's route a little bit specifically for them. So we have a one-to-one interview at the beginning, and then we decide on the depth that you're going to go to, and you can sort of tailor that around your availability a little bit. But there's a certain base level that we think is necessary for it to be value for money. And, you know, we obviously want people to get the most out of this. So attending as many of the live calls as possible is certainly going to be really important. But they're all recorded. So if you don't manage to get to all of them, there is that option. Getting through the online self-led content is important, but can be spread over the 2 years instead of trying to get it all in the first year of training. And then the design process of doing your context is pretty important to get done in the first year. So there is a kind of reasonable time commitment. But I think, you know, actually, if you break that down in, apart from the kind of immersive 3 day blocks, then, you know, I would say most people could probably, depending on their route and how they're adapting it, you know, 2 to 3 hours a week. I would think 4 hours max, you'd manage to get through that content. Now, most people can catch up with the videos or look at the online content, you know, in an hour after dinner or whatever. I think we've tried to make it very achievable for people that are working full time and busy. And yeah, most people seem to manage it. Occasionally get people having a little busy period where they've got to drop off, and that's fine. But actually what we're finding is that attendance is pretty good, and it's pretty achievable for people in full-time jobs, isn't it, I would say.
Yeah, and a lot of maybe some of it comes from, maybe we do a session, we hear from a guest expert, or we learn a new concept in the Zoom call, and then it's not a case of then you're going to have to sit down and reading about that for another 2 hours. It's a case of next time you're checking the stock or walking around the farm or doing something day to day, it's then thinking about what's been learned and thinking about how that applies to you and what that might mean and how you feel it. It's that kind of thing. It's like an immersive learning thing. So yes, absolutely, 4 hours a week, including the Zoom call, basically, is plenty of time. And we've definitely designed it to be able to be done around life as it is today in 2025, being super busy.
And then we have a WhatsApp group as well, don't we? So that, as you said, when people are reflecting on a session, if they've got time, they can share lots on the WhatsApp group, and that's really helpful for other people. And if they haven't got time, they'll just drop out for a wee while, and that's absolutely fine. But that's been a really great way of reinforcing the learning through the year. Okay, for someone who's already doing some regenerative practices, how do you ensure the program will take them deeper rather than just covering things they already know? Well, I think maybe this is an opportunity to talk through the actual program details, isn't it? Which, you know, I can jump into if you like and start off. So as we've already explained, we like to go deep and broad. You know, we often think in our modern world, we often think about specialisms and the fact that we need to know more and more and more about soil health, and you go deeper and deeper, but then you realize that actually your system might be designed completely wrong. So we try and do both. So we have, for those that want to, we have a deep online self-led technical aspect. So we have a soils course, we have a plants course, we have an animals course, and we have a climates course, and that's all self-led but goes into quite a lot of detail and on the technical side. So that's not available through most training courses that we've come across. So that's one aspect. The whole developing your own context, you know, it's based around very similar processes to holistic management, but we've used our experience of the UK context and how particularly different UK contexts need a slightly different approach. And we've also sort of blended aspects of permaculture. So that process is quite unique. And again, is much more supported than in other situations and other training. So we are taking you and guiding you through a series of online courses and sessions on Zoom and through our immersives on the farm, through the process of developing your own context for the first year, basically, with your buddy. So you've got some support, and of course our support to do that. So that's quite unique as a proposition. And then we've, as Claire said, we've got the Zoom sessions every 2 weeks. Some of those are in the first half related to developing your context or introducing soil system, plant system, animal system. But in the second half of the year, first year, we have a whole series of really great guest experts. On the farmer route, we have a whole bunch of people that are there to support you in all the aspects of what might be involved in a regenerative farm transition. So infrastructure, genetics training, examples of people that have been doing this stuff using a more in-depth process and context and design. And then on the professional side, we've got, regenerative business, regenerative economics, a whole bunch of great speakers there. And then we realized by the end of year one, you've given them all of this information and you've got your designs, but then really that's when the rubber hits the road and you need the support. So year two is really about helping hold hands through that process, making sure that we do a range of different offerings in terms of we have a clinic that people can jump on to ask questions, practical stuff for the farmers, and then a whole really in-depth process of what we call routing to place, which goes into helping farms and people actually to start to really engage with their own places, and that's really to help them become bioregional regenerative leaders. So we take them through a whole process that is a part self-development, part understanding deeply their bioregional context in order to be able to think about applying the regenerative principles to their own unique situations in whatever profession that might be. So if I missed anything, Claire, in terms of our why we're different and why the program takes people deeper, is there anything else? I think you covered most of that.
Yeah, no, I think we've covered that. Yeah, I think that's fine. And I'm might kind of from a farmer perspective come on to the next question, which is twofold. One, in that we're limiting the cohort to 20 people. Why that number, and what should someone know about whether the program's right for them? And I guess that's the bit that I want to just go on first, which is how do you know the program is right for you? And I think it is that from a farmer perspective, for me, because I sit in this kind of field, I think which we get a lot of people coming to Roots to Regeneration, is that like professionals that farm, and so I farm, but it's not the only thing that I do, and I do the other stuff through choice, because I enjoy working with people and helping. So the where I feel from my own experience that Roots to Regeneration is right is where it's that kind of like tried a few things, done some regenerative stuff, like we've tried some practices, I've started mob grazing, but it's not quite working, I haven't quite got everything, doesn't seem like everything I've read in the books, I'm doing it, but it's not quite happening. Why is that? And so I feel like that's a real like practical example of why Roots to Regeneration is right, because it helps then with the depth needed to unfold why that's not working, and it's because of the system approach. I think is true, and the same for professionals that are coming at it from the angle of wanting to support their professional career. Again, it's that sort of, we have someone like, one example I can think of on our first cohort was like, I'm talking to government about the fact that they should be doing more in regenerative agriculture, but I don't really know what that means for a farmer on the ground. Like, I know they might do some mob grazing or they might do a direct drill, but I don't know what that really means. And so for them, it's been a case of doing Roots to Regeneration have been right for them, because that's helped them really deeply understand what that means. Plus, they've got the additional stuff of, regenerative leadership and other things that have come that they can actually take back to their organisation, but they're understanding what it means deeply for farmers to transition. And so going back to the first part of that question, and then jump in, Caroline, but why are we limiting the cohort to 20 people? And we feel that 20, having done a couple of cohorts now, 20 is between 16 and 20 is a really good number for being enough people that there's like diversity in the group, lots of different viewpoints, lots of context, lots of support around for the cohort to work as a self-supporting thing for each other, but not too many people that it becomes like people are strangers because it's so many people, everybody can't get to know each other. So 20 is our kind of optimum number for that reason, for taking people through the program.
Yeah, and the only thing I'd add to that is just that 20 seems to be, that smaller group really works, because people really get to know each other, don't they? And if people that are a bit shy or not as confident get a chance to speak up, and they're not intimidated, and we found the groups have become so self-supporting, haven't they? And really interesting dynamics. So we think that is about the magic number. So I do run courses that are larger, and that's fine for short events, but very much if you want people to engage, I think that smaller cohort works really well. Okay, so the next question is, walk us through what a typical month looks like for someone in the program. Do you fancy tackling that one?
Yeah, well,
It'll depend on the month.
yeah, it depends on the month, but let's start with March, when the program begins, as just an example month, where in mid-March, what we would have is a call with Caroline and I to kind of talk about you and your route, as Caroline mentioned, through, because although we have the farmer route and the professional route, we also, many people end up doing a dual route, so you can do a bit of both, and you can decide, we can talk about how that might work for you, and then we refresh that again after 6 months, and we relook at that with you, having done 6 months of the program. How are you on track with that? And so in March, then we would have, so we have that one-to-one call. Then we would have our immersive in-person events, and the way that they work, there's 3 of them through the first year. They have a similar format. We will, on the Tuesday, we meet a late morning to allow people to travel. Then we're together then through until the Thursday lunchtime, and so that is a kind of during the day, and then and staying overnight, often collectively together. And certainly for the one in March, we'll all be at 42 Acres together. And then following on from that, 2 weeks after, we'll start with our Zoom calls. So that's a month where we've got an immersive in person. We've got the Zoom calls and we've got the immersive in person. But in a normal month, it would be 2 Zoom calls, and it will be some online self-led learning in between that, and interaction on the WhatsApp group. If that explains what a normal month would look like.
Yeah, it probably would have been more sensible to say a year, wouldn't it? So we've got
Yes.
the immersive over March, in March. Then we have another 3-day immersive at Garrowborough in September. We've got Planton in June, and then Garrowborough in September, haven't we? And we're very much encouraging people, particularly in year 2, to start to self-organise in terms of meeting up at different events, and also visiting each other. And some people on this year's cohort are really doing that, aren't they? They're not only going to see their buddies, which is great. In fact, I'll jump in and try and tick up a few of these next questions. But the buddy system is great, because we try to curate that. So we try very much to try and match people that will benefit from each other, which could look like, a different range of things. But they will ideally go and visit their buddy, but not necessary. If you haven't got the time availability, you could do that online. But ideally what you're doing is supporting them developing the farm context. And the reason for doing that is that good learning, and we use an integral kind of theory approach to how we design our learning and our philosophy of learning. We want to be able to learn the concepts and the principles, but then actually have them applied and see them applied, and then get the feedback, and then be able to try and sort of see how other people are applying that as well. So we're trying to do as much of that through the whole first year as possible. So with your buddy, a professional will help them develop their context, and the farmer will obviously be learning in their own situation. And then they will see that starting to be applied, and then they'll also hear about the experiences of other people doing that within the same cohort. So they're getting all those different layers of learning and different ways of sort of fully embedding that concept. And the idea is for the professionals, when they've actually grasped those principles in action, they can then start to think about in the second 6 months how they would apply that to their profession. And that's a much harder thing to grasp. The idea of, well, regenerative principles makes sense in terms of land, but what about when I'm designing my, economic business? What does that look like? Well, that's how you learn. You learn deeply the principles, and then you can start to have those aha moments about how that might apply to something that doesn't seem related to land or farming. So that's what we then do, is in the second 6 months, is then support the professionals through a whole series of inspiring talks from people that have done that in different ways, to try and catalyse something that means, and also we're working on their personal development in terms of what's their uniqueness, what's their, unique skill set and experience, and what gets them fired up about the future. And then they try and curate something that's, really just very unique for them, using those principles that they've learned. I think we've covered quite a few of these different questions, but let's have a look and see if there's any others that we might not have picked up on. I think there's a two that we could blend together here, which is some stories from existing cohorts about, or what do we find rewarding about people that have kind of got this, been through the program, and have kind of had those aha moments and started to design their farm differently. I think I just, as a general kind of overarching statement from me, it's just so rewarding having been training in regenerative agriculture for quite a few years now, and having gone through the training people at that practice level for a while, you know, where they may be not totally on board with the idea of it, and you know, getting a lot of pushback because they're very new to the whole concept. What's been a real joy is because we really are most suited to people that have already gone through that stage, haven't we? That have got to the point where we no longer trying to convince them that regenerative agriculture is the right thing. They should have been there, tried it, done the whole YouTube thing, done the whole Gabe Brown thing. And I've got to the point where yeah, I really want to do this. I really am fired up about it. But now how? That's where we come in. And that's been so rewarding because people are open. And when you don't have all that kind of trying to convince people bit to do, you can really concentrate on really serving people, can't you? And I think that's been incredibly rewarding. So, and I think for me, it's the mindset shift bit that where you get that sudden flip that you see in people sometimes, where they suddenly get systems thinking, or you can see them thinking about problems in a different way, or they have those aha moments about, oh, I never thought about the farm designing this. It's like all of a sudden all of our skills could come together to develop the farm in this way, and that's something that's, you know, not been thought of before. So for me, those are the most rewarding bits, and we've seen some great examples of that, haven't we? So yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's getting the quotes or the feedback, you know, from simple ones like, if it wasn't for doing Roots to Regeneration, I would have sold my cows by now, through to navigating some of the most complex of succession situations.
Yes.
Whereby people have now, you know, they're even within, you know, we know, you know, anyone that's in a family farming situation is likely to have some elements of challenge around that, and so knowing that they're managing to navigate because they're getting really clear on what they want from it, and they are able to then talk to other members of the family about that, and even if, you know, it doesn't all get resolved, it's not like some magic wand, but they feel clear about their bit and they're happy with that, and they know that they wouldn't have been able to address that without that context work. So what's important for them and how do they want the farm to be, and then they've been able to communicate that, and that's been another that's one of the stories that I kind of always feel really warmed about.
And although, you know, Roots Regeneration is still fairly new, so we haven't got people that have been doing it for 5 years and redesigned the farm and all the baseline evidence, we're still fairly early in that process. What we have seen is significant improvements in the potential for profitability and regenerative outcomes, because ultimately, as we teach, you can't really say that you're regenerative until you start to measure that you're getting regenerative outcomes in some form or another. So, and again, that suite of things that we measure is something that we teach, but will be contextual. So, but initially we've had some really great results with the designs, the potential, the mindset shifts, and I think for us, the community that's becoming, you know, this R2R kind of community that's so supportive, and now we're able to blend multiple cohorts, is going to get even better because we're benefiting from all those different people that are speaking the same language and thinking in the same way, that are doing all sorts of different things in different places, that they're starting to think about how, you know, two people could join together, or like people can visit each other, or they can start to kind of really benefit in terms of businesses and things as well. So that's been really rewarding. And then I think, in order just to wrap up, we'll cover this last couple of questions. Well, I think we've sort of alluded to it, but who's it not for? So maybe you could pick that up. And then I guess just a final wrapping up about, you know, when is the deadline? What are the next steps? I'll let you lead, and I'll try and pick up on anything that we don't get.
Fine. So, who is it not for? Yeah, I think it's for anybody who is not convinced that a system that regenerates is the right way to go. So, we don't want to spend time taking away from those that are already committed that that's what they want to do. They just want to learn how. And then people are coming at different stages of that, of their understanding of what it means, but they're committed to the thought that they want a system that regenerates. So that's who it's not for, is anyone who doesn't think a regenerative system is the right part of the future. It's not for you, and that's okay. There's plenty of other things that are out there. The app.
Sorry, just to jump in as well.
Yeah.
We didn't sort of cover who it's for in terms of the level, you know. So something that I should have mentioned earlier is that we can, yes, a certain basic level of kind of, you know, of understanding is great, but we can absolutely have people that are relatively new to it and that don't have any technical knowledge of regen so far, or we can have people that are actually quite deeply knowledgeable about practices and certain aspects of it, and then we can bring in the extra sort of breadth and depth to that as well for all the reasons that we've described. So I think we can pretty much adapt to anybody's level. As you say, though, it's the mindset and willingness, isn't it, that really is essential. So I just thought I'd better add that in.
Yeah, no, that's totally right. Yeah, completely right. Because it's about does your own route through. It's okay to be coming in at different levels. And then, practically speaking, the deadline for applications is the 31st of January. The programme starts in March, and with the main thing being our first immersive in-person event in the last week in March. And so if people are interested, the next steps to take is to book a call. We speak to everybody before we invite you to apply, because we want to chat it through with you and talk to you and make sure that it's right for you and we're right for you. And so there's an opportunity on the website to book a call with us to talk about that, and then we'll talk about the application form process and the rest of it during that call.
And we do have some bursary places available. So although the deadline is January, if you do want to consider being, you know, apply for a bursary, then the sooner the better you book that call, because that is sort of first come, first served in terms of suitable people, that is. So yeah, get your call booked as soon as possible, and then we can tell you about the next steps. And we hope that this has addressed a few of the questions that might be coming up, and equally we can happily chat through any other questions within our call. And as you say, then there'll be a kind of a process of then filling in an application form. If you want to be considered for a bursary, that will be part of that process. And then there'll be as Claire has already said, there's a one-on-one sort of designing your unique route before you get started, before we all meet at 42 Acres in March. So that's the kind of next steps there. Great. So thanks everybody for watching. And as I said, we'll put a link underneath so that you can book a call with Claire and myself if you want to progress. And thanks for your time and attention.
Thank you.